The Democracy Forum brings you another not-to-be-missed webinar, Challenges and Opportunities of India's Youth Dividend. India has one of the world's largest youth populations, with almost two-thirds of its citizens under the age of 35. This demographic advantage presents both major opportunities and formidable challenges for the country's economic, social and political future. What are these challenges and opportunities? How can India's youth dividend be channeled effectively, and what benefits could accrue from it? How might failure to do so be to India's detriment? To learn more about these and related issues, tune into our live debate, bringing your comments and questions for our expert panel.
Hello and welcome. I am Humphrey Hawksley, and this is the Democracy Forum debate, where we examine issues that are often missed by the mainstream media and commentariat. This is one today, Challenges and Opportunities of India's Youth Dividend. As we heard, more than 65% of the population under 35, India stands at a pivotal moment when its vast youth cohort could become an engine of unprecedented economic growth. But will the world's biggest democracy grasp the moment? And without sufficient jobs, skills and social infrastructure, India's young population could become a source of instability rather than strength. To look into this, we have a brilliant panel: Santosh, Mehrotra, Sabina, Dewan, Pradeep, Bhandari and S.Y. Quraishi. But before we hear all their words of wisdom, views and counter-views, I have the privilege of asking Democracy Forum Chair, Lord Charles Bruce, to lay out the background and the canvas of our debate. Lord Bruce, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar, which will explore the huge challenges confronting Indian politicians seeking to correct an unbalanced labour market and create sustainable employment opportunities for young people. I'm grateful to the team at TDF for highlighting this issue and providing a panel of renowned experts to share their perspectives with us today. And my thanks, as always, to Humphrey Hawksley for accepting the role of moderator. According to the Indian government's own commissioned employment surveys, a quarter of the entire working population, over 100 million people, are not merely without regular employment, but have given up looking for it and are surviving on seasonal and casual work. Or in other words, India is facing a crisis of unemployment that has grown deeper by the day, and no government has so far been able to resolve it. Publishing its most recent figures for India, the United Nations estimates the population has reached 1.46 billion, where 68% is of working age, but where only 4.4% of the 15 to 29 age cohort is formally skilled. And where the Skills and Development Ministry acknowledged that just over 50% of graduates have skills needed by a modern economy. And furthermore, skills training does not appear to be a priority for India's employers. Only 36% of companies participate in upskilling programs, compared to 85% for China, 52% for Russia, and 51% in Brazil. Indeed, India's total deficit in training comprises at least 300 million farm and non-farm workers, leaving the World Bank to conclude, I quote, "Although India's education system is of high quality, the supply of skilled labour is mediocre, thus preventing it from cashing in fully on its demographic dividend of a vast growing working age population." Indeed, in its annual survey of employment predictions, the Manpower Global Talent Shortage Survey 2025 explains that, I quote, "India faces a bigger shortfall in workers with practical training, digital literacy and soft skills than the global average, thus demonstrating that education is no longer a way out of poverty." A McKinsey report published in 2020 suggests, I quote, "India's GDP will have to grow by 8.5% annually over the next decade to create 90 million new non-farm jobs between 2023 and 2030. Is this achievable? The Modi government late last month unveiled a sweeping deregulatory package promising to ease compliance burdens for business, improve flexibility, and raise security for workers across the job market. But for the vast majority of young people who now regularly fail to find even marginally secure and paying jobs, the researchers Shankar Jha and McElvoy conclude, I quote, "There is now no option left but to migrate from the rural areas to the cities and join the crowds of job seekers who assemble every morning in the labour huts, hoping that they will be among the lucky ones that day. They are entirely unprotected from the vagaries of the market and the hammer blows of fate." Well, thank you very much for deciding to watch our webinar today. And if you have any questions or comments for the panel, please pass them to the chair.
Thank you, Lord Bruce. Only 4.4% of young people formally skilled. Why on earth is that? And how did that come about? Our first panelist is Santosh Mehrotra at the University of Bath, formerly of the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, where he specializes in labor issues. Earlier, he headed UNICEF's Global Research Program on Social Economic Policy and was chief economist of the Global Human Development Report, as well as being Director General of India's National Institute of Labour Economics Research Planning Commission. So he knows his stuff. Santosh Mehrotra, challenges and opportunities of India's youth dividend. Share with us your knowledge.
Thank you very much to Democracy Forum and both of you for that excellent start to this brief seminar. Let me just define what this dividend what it means. A youth dividend is defined as that period in the life of a nation which comes but once in the life of any nation, in which the share of the working age population is rising and the share of the dependent population is falling. Who are the dependent population? Those who are under 15, below the working age, and those who are over the age of 60 or 64, in other words, beyond the working age again. So if the share of the working age population is rising, and assuming that they get jobs, particularly in the non-farm sector, then what happens is, because if they get jobs in the non-farm sector, in industry and services, the productivity of industry and services is higher than in agriculture. Therefore, they earn higher incomes, so their savings are higher. And the cumulative savings of the economy, so the savings to GDP ratio rises, and as a result of that, the investment to GDP ratio rises. That's why the growth rate is supposed to be high, and that's why this is called the dividend. Now, India's dividend began in the early 1980s, and what I want to emphasize in this brief intervention is that this dividend is going to end in another 15 years' time. We have absolutely no time to lose at all. We've estimated this, that it's going to end in another 15 years by the end of the 2030s. And we have a forthcoming book on this subject called India Out of Work, to be published by Bloomsbury, London. And given that we have such little time, it's absolutely critical that we create more jobs than we have been creating. You see, but when we were growing between 2003, 4 and 15, we were growing at 7.8% per annum. And since then, we've been the second fastest growing large economy in the world. In the last 3 or 4 years, we've become the fastest growing large economy. But when we were the second fastest and we were growing at 7.8% per annum, we were also generating 7.5 million new jobs per annum. That number of jobs has fallen in the last 10 years or so on account of policy mistakes, something I will come back to very shortly. But the more important point is that there are millions for whom we have to create jobs. So our estimate is in this book that we actually need to generate 10 to 11 million new non-farm jobs each year. And why is that? Because there are 4 groups of people for whom we have to provide those jobs. Who are those 4? 3 of them consist of a stock and 1 consists of a continuous flow. The flow consists of those who are turning 15 and the youth 15 to 29-year-olds. There are 6 million who are entering the labor force each year. So they have to be provided jobs each year, and they're all getting much better educated. So their expectations are that they obviously want to work in industry and services and not in agriculture. Second group consists of those who are small and marginal farmers and landless workers, and that we cannot continue with a situation where 42% of the workforce is creating only 16% of GDP in agriculture. So we have to pull workers out of agriculture in much larger numbers. The third group consists of the stock of unemployed. Now, the stock of unemployed was only 10 million in 2012. That had risen to about 28 million most recently, according to the government's numbers. The majority of them are, of course, youth. And the final group consists of youth who are not in education, employment, or training, and that number has shot up very significantly. And these are the 4 groups for whom we have to constantly keep generating jobs of the order of 10 to 11 million per annum in the non-farm sector. Now, why do I keep emphasizing the non-farm sector? Because this brings me to why the growth rate has slowed. The growth rate in the last 10 years has been 5.8% per annum. We may be the fastest growing large economy, but the fact is that's only because China has slowed. China's economy is not growing as fast. Had we continued to grow at 7.8% per annum, by now would have been the 3rd largest economy in any case, and we could have, had that approach had continued, we would have generated many more jobs than we are currently generating. There are 2 structural crises that our economy faces, and those impact both the demand for labor and it impacts the supply of labor. What are the structural crises that the Indian economy currently faces? You see, we were in a process of structural change. All developing economies must, rapidly transform structurally with a rising share of employment as well as contribution to GDP coming from industry and from services rather than from agriculture. What has happened in the last 7 or 8 years is that the contribution of manufacturing to GDP has actually fallen. Manufacturing employment has fallen, and the absolute number of workers in agriculture has increased very dramatically. So what happened after COVID and the way COVID was handled, some 35 million workers went back to agriculture in the very first year in 2021. And in the middle of 2024, the absolute number of workers was higher compared to pre-COVID years by 80 million. So our total number of workers in agriculture increased, which is the opposite of structural change. It increased from 200 million to 280 million. So we've got to pull many more millions out of work. That's structural crisis number 1. And so when work in industry and services is not growing so fast, the demand for labor is obviously down. Secondly, the second structural crisis, of course, was mentioned by both of you in the introduction, which is on the supply side, where there is an education sector crisis. You see, we massified school education very rapidly in the last 30 years. Then we massified higher education enrollments very rapidly. Quality has declined, and young people who are coming out of our education system, a very significant share of them are unemployable, as I think was mentioned. And of course, you also mentioned that a very small share of our school and higher education students have got formal vocational training. Formal vocational training in the workforce, barely 4%. However, when you add on another 7% of those who have technical training, meaning those who have post-secondary engineering or STEM subjects, then the number does increase. But the fact of the matter is that it's still not good enough for a country which needs to compete in a world where Industrial Revolution 4 technologies are making a difference. So what is the way out? And I'm now finishing because I don't want to go over my 8 minutes or so. The point really is that we have to address the problem of job creation by adopting an industrial policy, which this country has not had. We need to have a manufacturing strategy, all of which is outlined in our recent book. And we have to fix both the education system as well as the vocational education and training system. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. That was fascinating. Just to encapsulate, in your view, India's youth dividend, for want of another word, although it doesn't sound the right word, is more of a challenge than an opportunity at the moment.
As of now.
And these the position that India finds itself in, how does that compare, say, to other Asian countries, China, Japan, not the rest of South Asia, because I presume that's similar, but Southeast Asia? I mean, do they all have these problems?
Well, Japan is already a very rapidly aging society. Japan is very much in the category of Europe. I mean, in fact, Japan started aging practically before Europe did. China has, so Japan's dividend is long gone. So as far as China is concerned, China's demographic dividend is over. It gave over about 10 years ago. They have to create fewer jobs. They are already an aging society. So we have 15 years left in our demographic dividend. So that's the big difference between us and China.
So you have the resource, but the capacity is not there to use it because of what?
That's
bad government over the decades. Is that right?
Well, I wouldn't say over the decades. This is the difference I was making, because when we were growing between 2003, 4, and 15 at nearly 8% per annum, GDP growth was 8% per annum, we were generating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs per annum. And then the unemployment rate was only 2%. Today, the open unemployment rate is triple that, and the youth unemployment rates have also tripled. So that's the tragedy. That's the point I'm making. The growth rate has slowed, and the elasticity of the growth to generate jobs has also come down because of policy mistakes.
Could I just give you a question which you've covered, but if I'll give it to you directly from Anil Batra? Is the Indian economy generating enough new jobs to absorb the huge influx of young people entering the workforce every year?
No, I answered that question already, because I said 6 million are entering the labor force. We need to generate for 3 other categories who are in agriculture, who are a stock of unemployed, who are NEETs, meaning not in education, employment, or training, and their number is 100 million. So all those have to be provided jobs, and that means nothing short of 11 million new non-farm jobs are needed each year.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are generating half of that.
Thank you so much for that. We have the India's youth is a challenge at the moment. Now we go to, and please stay with us, and we go to Sabina Dewan, President and Executive Director of JustJobs, which is a global research institution that guides effective public policy and governance of labor markets. Has it guided India, we're going to ask? Trying to get something that suits everyone, businesses, the workers, and that magical goal we call economic growth. She has been with the International Labour Organization, the European Commission, and is a familiar face and voice on the print and television media. India's youth, Sabina Dewan, what does your research show?
Yes. So first off, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this very important discussion. I'll just pick up on a couple of points that were made already and then add to the conversation. So, I think we all recognize that the scale of the challenge that India is confronting right now is enormous. And, you mentioned 65% under 35 years of age. Just to add a little bit more texture to that, there are approximately 370 million youth in India between the ages of 15 to 29. And that is higher than the entire population of, take your pick, any other industrialized country in the world, right? So the scale of the challenge that India is confronting is very large. And I think what's important to note is that there's several labor market related changes that are happening, disruptive forces that are acting upon labor markets that are really exacerbating the challenge. So Santosh talked a great deal about the lack of jobs and the slowing pace of job creation, all of which is very much true. But this is only going to get worse because there's a confluence of disruptive forces, right? From technological change, there's been a lot of talk about AI, but also the platform economy, automation, and so on. And then you've got climate change that's disrupting labor markets. You've got the energy transition imperative that's disrupting labor markets. You had the pandemic. So it's not just about, how countries are managing economies or how we're managing, globalization anymore. It's also about all of these additional disruptive forces that are really upending the way that we live and work. And I think against this very fraught and tumultuous backdrop, there's a real deficiency of policy, of regulations, of institutional architectures, in a developing country like India that are ready and equipped to manage the change. And the institutional capacity to manage the change is much slower than the pace and scale of these, of these forces. So you've got this confluence of disruptive forces. You've got this against the deficient policy, regulatory, and institutional architectures. On top of that, you have, a big youth population, and some of the problems that we've been confronting, despite all the focus on skill development over the last couple of decades, is that there really is a mismatch between the aspirations of these young people, the education and skills that these young people do acquire, and what is in demand by labor markets. So again, in my dad's generation, he was in the same job for his entire career, right? But now people have to keep changing jobs, and it's not just going to be a matter of choice. I choose to change my jobs, although that's certainly the case, but it's also become an imperative because some sectors are declining, others are rising. And so there's this constant churn that is going to force people, compel people to keep changing jobs maybe 3 or 4 times in their lifetime. And the skills architecture has to actually be able to meet that challenge of skilling and reskilling. So then you've got disruptive forces, you've got deficient policy, regulatory, and institutional architectures to manage the change. Then you've got this mismatch between aspirations, education, and skills and what the labor market actually demands. And then a couple of things that I think, have already come up is a lack of involvement on part of industry. So, there isn't the industry is not as involved in skilling as it should be, nor is it willing to pay a premium for workers that do, that are skilled through public infrastructure, right? So that again is kind of a disincentive for young people to go and acquire formal skills, and it also leads to a lack of outcomes, of a lack of impact, despite a lot of public investment in skills training. And then, of course, there's a lack of jobs. But I think what's also important is, we've the 4.4 percent of respondents that recognize as being formally skilled has come up a couple of times, right? That's a very small number given all the conversation around skills training and all the emphasis on skills training. But what is really important to note is that 4.4% doesn't actually recognize all of the people that have, learned how to be carpenters through their uncles, or learned how to be electricians through their uncles, or, that are engaging in various forms of actually what is skilled work. The formal system doesn't recognize that work as being skilled. So you end up with this 4.4% that are formally skilled, but actually we do have young people that are very skilled, but they're skilled for self-employment, and they're skilled for professions that unfortunately, are not formal jobs. These are informal jobs. These are very precarious and insecure forms of work that are part of the self-employment category. 58% of employment in India is self-employment, right? So to the extent that, Santosh outlined various categories, to the extent that there are young people that are in the labor market, a very large share are actually self-employed in incredibly precarious forms of work. So the challenge is really, really great. And there's all of these different aspects to the challenges. But I want to take just another couple of minutes to say, okay, we are at grave risk of sort of losing this demographic window of opportunity. And as Santosh said, we need to work very quickly. We have no time to lose. But there are glimmers of hope. And I think it's important to recognize some of the initiatives that are underway that, maybe they're not big enough, maybe they're not fast enough, but they do exist. And they're actually trying to steer the ship on the right path. And so I'll quickly just point out three and then I'll stop. One is, the National Education Policy 2020 and the curriculum framework that the government has released. This is groundbreaking because it actually does try to break down the silos between education and skills development by mainstreaming vocational education from 6th grade onwards in school systems, right? So the idea is to underscore the value of work. The idea is to ensure that all children are exposed to working with their hands and in different trades. The idea is to align the education and vocational education systems with labor market demand by tapping into what is really in need in local economies. And this inclusion of vocational education and integration of vocational education into the school system and then onwards also inculcates foundational skills for work, right? So things like communication skills, underscoring the value of work. How do you use your hands? How do you ask for and negotiate and advocate for appropriate remuneration? So it creates opportunities for really moving the needle on all of these fronts. There is also a lot happening at the state level in India. Government of Karnataka has released its state level skills policy. The state of Orissa, there's a great deal happening in terms of investments in skills training at different levels, and also the operationalization of this national education policy and inclusion and integration of vocational education in school systems. And then finally, there's a lot happening in terms of philanthropic funding that is also promoting more work around skills training, more access to better skills training and education. So I'll give you one example. The Azim Premji Foundation has a scholarship program for young women that have completed 10th and 12th grade education from public schools. And they're giving them 30,000 rupees to go into a training program or a higher education program of their choice. The government of Karnataka has actually also added funds to this pool to essentially make this a universal scholarship program for all young girls that are looking to get trained. So, looking at what is happening in these aspects in terms of the state level policies, the national education policy, looking at what's happening in the philanthropic space, I think there are glimmers of hope in how we are tackling the challenges. Do we need a lot more in terms of policies, in terms of investments from the state? Absolutely. But I'll stop there for now. Thank you.
Sabina, thank you very much. I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Santosh Mehrotra. So you are seeing this more as a challenge than an opportunity at the moment. Is that correct?
Yes, it is absolutely more of a challenge than an opportunity, but a challenge that many are working very hard to rise to address.
And do you agree with his 2040 deadline? You do. So we have two panelists that agree with each other, which is but just tell me why is it that that China managed to make itself the factory of the world, presumably lots of people working in those industries, and India has got this situation that you've just described so vividly. What happened?
So I do think that there's many reasons for that. I think the most obvious one being a completely different political system in China that makes it easier to maneuver, and do things at scale, low cost of capital, very, very low cost of capital, and various other policies that China, given its political structures, was able to undertake that are not necessarily, measures that a country like India or other countries are, have done or are encouraged to do, right?
And given your global research, how does India? And I asked this question to Santosh Mehrotra too, but how does India compare to? We've covered Japan and China, but to Latin America, to the Middle East, to Africa, when it comes to youth opportunities or challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a double-edged sword. I mean, first, we do have to recognize just the sheer scale of the challenge in India is much larger than,
it's
any
more
of
than
these
Nigeria, more than Brazil?
Absolutely. Yes.
Why?
We have, yes. Why? Because there's just simply a lot more younger people, right? And there's just the number of youth that we actually have to provide jobs for is much larger, that we have to skill for is much larger. And as Santosh said, that there has been a massification of education, but that doesn't really speak to neither the quality of education and it neither speaks to the quality of education nor the ability of the education skill systems to adapt. Here, in that aspect, if I could just finish that thought, in that aspect, I do think comparatively, compared to South Korea, for example, India has not spent enough on education. It has not invested enough in education relative to some of these other Asian tiger economies that did actually take off, right?
And getting back to Nigeria and Brazil, for example, have they done better? Have they invested more in education than India?
Nigeria has not. But again, I'm talking about the sheer scale of the challenge in India. I think Nigeria and Brazil also have massive challenges.
Okay, so when you, sorry, just to pin you down on this, when you talk about the scale of the challenge in India, you talk about it as if it's a natural, unstoppable event, but there's elements like birth control and that just, don't come into it, or how does it work?
Okay, now we're going into a completely other conversation other than skills.
Well, I mean, it is what they have got a youth that is, you say, is unparalleled. And how did that happen without the government coming in behind to build the infrastructure for them?
Well, I think that I do think that there's no question that there's been a lack of investment in the kind of architecture for education and skills and even health, right? And that has been a problem. But the sheer size of the population does pose an enormous challenge against the backdrop of technology and other disruptions. It's even more. It's even a bigger challenge. Why hasn't the government instituted sort of population control measures? I mean, I guess it's arguable. China had a one-child policy for a very long time. Now they're facing many challenges with that, right? So it's and there are cultural nuances of how much power does a woman have over her reproductive health and decisions in a patriarchal society like India. So if we start getting into the very nuanced reasons behind this, I think that would add a lot more texture to why we find ourselves in such a complicated situation right now.
I'm gonna come back to you with lots of questions when we open out of the panel. But thank you so much for that. And I think you've answered our next situation. Is that our third speaker, Pradeep Bhandari, who is a national spokesman for the ruling BJP party, has not come to the show. So we're doing what we call empty chairing him, probably because he would have to answer all the tough questions that our panelists are raising here. Our next panelist is Dr. S.Y. Quraishi, a former Chief Election Commissioner of India, and before that he was a Secretary of Ministry of Youth Affairs, Sports, the Government of India. He also handled the AIDS crisis there. He is the author of a number of books, the latest being Democracy's Heartland, Inside the Battle for Power in South Asia. What is that battle, Dr. Quraishi, and will India's youth benefit or be harmed by it? Give us your thoughts. I think you are muted.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for connecting my latest book to the title of today's webinar, Struggle. Now, my book is about the struggle for power in South Asia, but we have been talking of youth opportunity, or is it a challenge? Because there is a youth bulge, no doubt. 70% of India's population is below 35 years of age. We are perhaps the youngest country in the world with the median age of 29 years, as compared to 40 in UK or 39 in US and 50 in Japan. Now, this is a great opportunity which we are almost wasting. And as Professor Mehrotra had pointed out, that it's a short window of about 15, 20, 25 years. If we can convert it into an opportunity, it will be a blessing. If not, it's a curse. So the challenge for the government, the policymakers, and everyone, the society, is to convert it into an opportunity. Now, they are the most productive people. They have the energy. They have the desire to do something, but they have not been properly skilled. Now, there are two issues there. There is a huge unemployment, and at the same time, there is a huge unemployable population. Unemployed is that you have got your training, you got qualification, pretty good degrees, but you can't get a job, which is a large problem. And the worst is unemployable, because you'll find people applying for a job with a very impressive biodata, but when you call them for an interview, and the moment they open their mouth, you know where they stand, they know nothing. Totally unfit for any job. Obviously, the private sector will have no use for them, and that's why they start looking for government jobs, because you can get government jobs through through patronage and through knowing the correct, right politicians. That's something. Every government in India, every party in India fights the election on the promise of creating jobs. And every party fails to deliver on the promise. That, unfortunately, is the reality of India. On the other hand, there is a paradox that Indian trained people who are qualified, they are dominating the service sector in USA and even in UK. In fact, there is a joke that if all Indians leave UK today, but you will know by breakfast, the vacuum, the NHS will be empty. Heathrow Airport will suffer. The transport sector will suffer. All the eating joints, everywhere where Indians are have a huge presence, they will all disappear. So, while on the one hand we have our skilled pop, we have 25 top CEOs of multinational companies in USA who are Indians. That is one side. On the other hand, there are millions and millions of unemployed and unemployable in India. And only 5% of the people are formally skilled. Only 5, compared to 20, 30, 40, or even 80% in UK, US, and in South Korea, I believe it is 95%. Imagine with 5% skilled labor or a skilled population, we are dominating the US service sector, or in UK and Europe. If it was to become 10%, not to talk of 20, 30, what impact will it create for India? Of course, it will be a kind of a shock for those countries. Now, how to make use of this workforce? If like Japan has a aging population, and there are very few people to take care of them. In India, we have young people, able-bodied, fit to work if they can be trained in the care sector, and if we have proper immigration laws, if we have good labor laws, we can both benefit. Those aging countries and our youth bulge, we can both benefit. So I think this is a dilemma, and we have to give utmost urgency to the problem. And as my previous two speakers said, that at the moment it is more of a challenge, but it is an opportunity which we need to grab. And I don't know, although elections are fought on the subject, but how much serious strategic thinking goes into planning and to solve this problem, I don't think that is happening. And I believe my two colleagues will probably have good answers to give. Thank you.
Much that was sort of depressing and a little bit enlightening here. You mentioned, as a former election commissioner, you mentioned elections are or are not fought on that issue. Is this what people would vote on, or are they going to vote on something else?
Well, actually, since this is the biggest concern, unemployment is the biggest problem, but unfortunately, politicians are very smart and clever. They promise them jobs which they cannot deliver. But to divert their attention, they make them busy in other issues, other non-issues, and which make them serious, caste issues, communal issues, hate speech. They give them a cause and they start fighting in the streets, and they feel that they're doing a great job. So that is mostly diversionary tactic, and all because of the kind of...
The diversion is to something more instinctive, as you say, like going out and protesting, rather than buckling down and getting an apprenticeship or some job training.
Yes. Also, in India, we have had 30, 40 years of militancy and unrest in many parts of India, only largely because of unemployment. Because we don't give them employment, the militants will give. They will give them salary, they'll give them an identity, and they give them a cause. And they get busy. So most of them are not fighting for ideology, but they join those gangs because they get money and some purpose.
You mentioned, I mean, that's a very critical thing, which I want to bring the whole panel in a second on this 2040 deadline. But you mentioned that the number of Indian CEOs of US multinationals and blue chip companies. What is happening with these big companies in India, the Adanis, the Tatas, these big companies, in getting involved in training up the youth, the tea plantations and that sort of thing? There are these huge industries. Are they not getting involved?
Well, industry also has a limited potential, and particularly in this age of mechanization and automation and AI, the jobs are shrinking because what 20 people used to do, a computer can do single-handed, and AI will make it even more difficult. In fact, that adds to our challenge because what kind of job do we give them? Everybody cannot become a driver
Do
or a
these
plumber or a.
do these big Indian companies that we know here, because a lot of them own our companies here in Britain, do they feel that they have any responsibility towards addressing this problem?
Yes, indeed they have, but I'm very sorry to say that they are not doing enough. Some of them maybe they are trying because ultimately the companies work for profit, and taking on people who are not fully qualified, they're not going to be very productive for them. They have no place for them. Under government pressure, maybe they can reserve some jobs for some reasons, but ultimately it is the competition for profit. So these private giant companies can do a lot, but they're not doing enough. And in any case, the problem is so big that even if they genuinely want to do something, they cannot really handle it. And my previous speaker talked about self-employment. Actually, we have to do some creative thinking in self-employment opportunities. Also, Professor Mehrotra has been talking of on-farm or employment and non-farm employment. I think there is something which in the rural area and on the farm itself, food processing is a huge an industry with huge possibilities, and but only the I think 1 or 2 or 3% of our capacity is being used because there is great potential for food processing, and which will create the self-employment opportunities in the villages. So the real strategic deep thinking hasn't really gone into it, and I hope after this webinar, the policy makers, if they listen to it, and some and academics and universities. Yeah.
Unfortunately, the spokesman for the ruling party didn't show up. But can I open up to the panel now? Because I think I want to go back to Santosh Mehrotra at this stage. What will happen if this 2040, a very specific deadline where the opportunity becomes lost, then what happens?
Well, first of all, I think we need to stop kidding ourselves that we are among the youngest populations in the world. We are not. The fact of the matter is that we are a very rapidly aging society. And now, what's the distinction that is not often made is that, yes, when you look at the entire population, we have 2/3 of our population which is below the age of 35. But that's besides the point. What matters is who's in working age and who's in the workforce. Now, the important point here to keep in mind is that half of our workforce already is over 45. In other words, the remaining half is under 45. But the part which is over 45 already, in 15 years, when the dividend ends, when the share of the working age population begins to fall, then these people, this half of the workforce will already be at retirement age. We will have to provide for, that was your question, right? We will have to provide much greater health services. We'll have to spend much more on health services for an aging population, point one. Secondly, all these people will have to, before they reach retirement age, will need to be provided Social Security. All the three people on this panel who are Indians already have social insurance. They have death and disability insurance. We have maternity benefit. We have pensions. But that applies only to 10% of our population. That's the point that Sabina was making. 90% of our workforce is informal. So what I'm saying is that as this population which is informal and then the workforce which is informal must actually be given, that's a major challenge along with providing jobs for those who are entering the labor force. So this is one.
Just I want to bring in Sabina Dewan here. Do you agree with this? Do you agree? Because it seems that we're not talking about challenges and opportunities. We're talking about a pending catastrophe.
I do. I mean, it's hard to disagree with Santosh when he comes with the weight of what the data are saying, right? And so it's not a matter of opinion; it's a matter of fact. And I think that this is it is a very, very big challenge, potential to be a catastrophe. But I think that we do have 15 years, and I think there's some glimmers of hope in terms of recognizing the scale and the importance of the challenge and trying to do something about it. Perhaps not fast enough, perhaps not, large enough, but we're trying. And so I think we have to see how this unfolds, and it's my job and Santosh's job and Professor, and Dr. Qureishi's job to keep at it, right? To keep at it, to keep focus on the need to address the challenge and the potential solutions and ways that we could actually address the challenge.
Can I go to the whole panel? We'll go to S.Y. Qureshi now, because we have a couple of questions in on the specifics. Anand Singh Tomar, how can Indian transition from a formal degree-based culture to one that equally values developing vocational skills? We have covered a bit of that. And then Dr. K.K. Udapahayi says, are there any specific region-focused strategies that might make the most of India's youth demographic? And what measures can India take to increase the low female labor force participation rate to maximize the youth demographic? S.Y. Qureshi, give us your thoughts on those two strands.
Yeah. First, Dr. Upadhyay's point about female, that's a very important thing, because half of India is women, female. And women suffer from all kinds of disabilities, discrimination, and the field of employment and vocations, they have a very small place. Whereas talking of the farm sector, which Professor Mehrotra has been talking about, 85% of women dairy workers are women. 50% of farmers are women, but we hardly see them as farmers. When we have on television, we have a program for farmers. We only address our farmer brothers. We never talk of sisters. Now, all the dairy industry, which is run by women, the only role men play is to go and collect the money from the dairy cooperative, where the rest of the thing is done by them. So we have to invest in education of our girls, and right from a very young age. That's the important point he made. The earlier question was about degrees and vocation. Very important point again, because our focus in India is all on degrees, and which is why we have fake degrees, we have cheating in examinations, we have leaked papers. And as I said, when you see the biodata of people applying for jobs, it's very impressive, but they know nothing. Whereas private sector actually doesn't really need your degrees, they want your skill. So we have to focus on skill development. I think one of the speakers, probably Sabina, had mentioned how in the school, from class 5 or class 8, if not 5, at least from 8, we should have exposed the children to the young children to vocational education. Our old new education policy of 1986, which introduced 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. The whole purpose was that then is up to class 10 normal schooling for the next 2 years, possibility of diverting from academic to vocational, and last 3 years either in vocational field or in education field, but it flopped. And I would wonder if a new education policy adequately addresses it. But I think the point about early exposure of young people to vocational training will teach them the dignity of working, dignity of the jobs by hand. That will be good.
I just want to go back to Santosh for the moment. This element about the female labor force. How much of that is cultural? How much of cultural India is stopping that happening?
You're asking me?
That used to be cultural, not any longer, because girls have gotten educated at an extremely rapid pace. Even in the poorest North Indian states, even in the rural areas, girls have all completed secondary education. Please understand that it's secondary enrollment, that is grades 9 and 10 for 15 to 16-year-olds, in our country shot up from 58% in 2010 to 85% in 2015. In other words, there was so much demand for secondary because there had been a massification of school education which had put upward pressure. So the point is that the girls are all have gotten secondary and above. I'm
Yes.
currently in Hyderabad, and believe it or not, this state has a higher education enrollment rate of 40%, but for females it's 41%. Point I'm making repeatedly is that our economy is not generating jobs fast enough, despite the fact that there are
The economy isn't generating jobs, but also the governments over the things hasn't created the infrastructure to supply the people to do those jobs, like S.Y. Qureshi does. Sabina, we have to wrap up very quickly now, but this idea that India is going to be a global power with huge influence and everything. From what I've heard today, it's not about weapons, it's not about defense and security, but simply the running of the country. It's not going to get anywhere near there. Is that right?
Yeah, Humphrey, I'll make 2 points on this. One, I think that India is in a fortunate position to be geostrategically and politically very important, and it is definitely capitalizing on that. That said, it has to deal with its economic and social issues, and as far as I'm concerned, the jobs and skills agenda needs to be at the very center of that. Without that, we don't realize our ambitions. The second point I wanted to make is just, on the question of female labor force participation and whether it's cultural, I think there are social norms that are still patriarchal that limit how many women employers hire, how they're treated. Women are still relegated to poor forms of low value added work in the informal sector. So I think we still have some ways to go in terms of addressing the patriarchal social norms that restrict women's participation, and not just the quantity of their participation, but also the quality. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. And S.Y. Qureshi, the final thought from you. Is it a catastrophe? Can India become a huge global power that it wants to be?
Well, it can. Certainly it can, but it has to address the issues in all seriousness and not only as a political rhetoric.
Thank you. And Santosh Mehrotra, you started, so I'll finish with you. A final thought: are we heading towards a catastrophe?
We don't have to be heading towards a catastrophe, and I believe that we were creating 7.5 million new non-farm jobs till 10 years ago. We are generating fewer when we need more, and we are capable of producing many more millions of jobs in the non-farm sector. We've got to get industrial policy in place, particularly which is labor-intensive manufacturing. Food processing has been mentioned, but it's not just food processing. It's about food processing is manufacturing. It is not in agriculture. It's about leather and such products, wood furniture, garments, textiles. These are all very labor-intensive sectors which account for 50%.
People have not been trained in. Is it the government or the private sector that has to do this?
It has to be a combination of the two, Humphrey. The fact of the matter is that we need to have a horizontal industrial policy. India does not have an industrial policy. China had one, and that's why they generated jobs which are labor-intensive.
We are out of time. Sabina, just a final 2 words from you.
Thank you very much for having me. Great conversation.
Thank you. And S.Y. Qureshi, a final thought from you?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. It was a very interesting interaction. I really enjoyed it.
And there's no birth control issue, I can assure you, Humphrey. That is problem solved. Our total fertility rate is already below replacement rate. That we reached there at 2021. So we are among the BRICS countries in the same category there.
Thank you for hitting that one on the head for me. Time's winged chariot has attacked us. Thank you all for your arguments. Really great insights. Fascinating for me. Challenges and opportunities of India's youth dividend. I think we decided that there are far more challenges than opportunities. Thank you, Santosh, Mehrotra, Sabina, Dewan, S.Y. Quraishi, and Pradeep Bhandari from the BJP spokesman that didn't turn up for the show. Our next Democracy Forum debate is at 2 p.m. London time next week, December the 16th. India, Middle East, Europe corridor, a counterbalance to the Belt and Road Initiative. Is that possible? That's a great topic. Please join us. And until then, from all of us at the Democracy Forum, stay safe and goodbye.
The Democracy Forum is a not-for-profit organisation founded in 2009 under the patronage of Baroness Nicholson of Winterbourne. Its principal goal was to work for the furtherance of democracy, peace and the rule of law in order to counter religious fundamentalism and intolerance in our global communities. In an increasingly fractured world, this goal continues to be the driving force behind all of the Forum's activities. Lord Charles Bruce is the current president of the Forum. Since its inception, the Forum has hosted and co-hosted seminars on a wide variety of topics relating to democracy and human rights across the world. The Democracy Forum encourages academics, students, journalists and other socially and politically conscious people to attend our seminars and to participate in the question and answer session. Details are available on our website, thedemocracyforumlimited.com.